Could Prince Andrew face further punishment after his showdown with King Charles? What has been going on behind the scenes? What is Prince William's involvement? And what next for Beatrice and Eugenie? We've got quite the show for you today. Hello and welcome to another episode of Palace Confidential, and what an episode it is. This week has been filled to the brim with royal news, and here to discuss it with me is the Daily Mail's diary editor, Richard Eden, the paper's senior editor-at-large, Richard Kay, and historian and Daily Mail columnist and author of a new biography on Charles III, Robert Hardman. Welcome to you three. Before you forget, do like and subscribe to the Daily Mail Royals channel so you never miss any of our exciting content like this. For example, earlier this week we posted a useful explainer of the Prince Andrew saga and a very spooky ghost tour of the Tower of London. If you missed that, it's going to play next. Now, we also have the Palace Confidential newsletter, which you can sign up to by scanning the QR code on your screen now or by following the link in the description below. Okay, now we really must get to our panellists' toot sweet, because I know you have a lot to say about the royal, formerly known as the Duke of York. Just hours after last week's episode of Palace Confidential was published, Prince Andrew made an extraordinary announcement. Now, Richard Eden, take us through what was said and what Andrew has agreed to.
Well, on this programme last week, we were calling for Prince Andrew, calling for him to be punished and that he should be stripped of his titles and his honours. So what actually happened was there was an announcement from Buckingham Palace, but it came from Prince Andrew that he himself had agreed not to use his titles. And it was a very peculiar statement, in my opinion, because it made Prince Andrew sound very honourable. He talked about his...
Well, we know he's so honourable. He said so on Newsnight.
Exactly. And he...
Too honourable.
Yeah.
He stressed his sense of duty in this statement. And it was almost like, I'm so honourable, I've decided, not to use my titles, like he's doing everyone a favour.
Yeah.
So from my view, it was very unsatisfactory.
Well, Richard Kay, as much as we would like to think that this episode of Palace Confidential is what done it, in making the King's mind up, but the pressure was becoming intolerable, wasn't it?
I think it was. Quite simply, the Andrew story, the issue around Andrew was sort of sucking all the oxygen out of the room as far as the royal family were concerned. They were making no headway at all on their very important official engagements. It was dominating coverage, not just here, but quite around the world as well. And I think the King really felt he had to act.
It's interesting, isn't it? Robert, tell us what your understanding is of what the conversation would have been between Charles and Andrew about this, or would it have been something that Charles passed to a secretary to deal with?
Well, clearly, the officials were right on this actually from the moment the Mail on Sunday dropped Sunday before last with that bombshell revelation that Prince Andrew, contrary to his Newsnight interview where he said he'd severed all connection with Jeffrey Epstein in 2010, no, he hadn't. He'd been writing to him in 2011 saying, let's play some more, at which point there was a sort of general sense, okay, yeah, it's time to do something. There've been other back noises as well. Don't forget, there've been endless reports linking Prince Andrew not just with an alleged Chinese spy, but more recently with the collapsed spy case involving Parliament. So it just looked like this was going to go on and on. Time to do something. Decision was made. It was made very much by the King in consultation with his officials. They drew up. They did the sort of the these are the options. And then there was a brief conversation between the brothers. There was no kind of summit. The King was in Scotland. Andrew, as ever, was at Windsor. And it was not an easy conversation, I understand. I think the Duke needed to be pointed in the right direction quite firmly. And essentially it was a case of, we can do this a nice way or the nasty way. We can. These titles are going to go. You can either drop them yourself or we'll take them away.
Yeah.
And he fell on his sword.
And do you think, like to your point, Richard Eden, about it not looking like a very contrite statement, do you think that might have been part of the deal? It's like, okay, well, I get to write what I say and I get to frame this the way I want to say it.
I think so. That's why he agreed to it, because he could have, I suppose, just point blank refused. But the point is, there wasn't an ounce of contrition in the statement. And that's what people needed after, he has a lot to say sorry for, genuinely, to the British people, that he lied to us, when he called the BBC to Buckingham Palace to give this interview. And the British people deserve that, and they didn't get it. And that's why I think they're left with a real sort of unsatisfactory feeling about it.
But also closer to home, you would think he would feel beholden to apologise to even at least his family.
Well, this is, I mean, we don't know what he said to his ex-wife or to his daughters. But it's very hard for him to maintain that he did nothing wrong, that that he's a wronged man, when the Mail on Sunday did publish this evidence in black and white.
All this comes after there were more claims in a book called Nobody's Girl by the deceased, Virginia Guiffre. And she said that she was forced to have sex with Prince Andrew, and that's a claim that he continues to deny. But what was said, Richard Eden?
I mean, this is her posthumous memoir, because we know she took her own life, tragically. And it was pretty much finished, I think, before her death. And in it, the publication coincides with Andrew's statement, and we think that's obviously related to why they put the statement out. And she repeats things largely that we already know. It's the claims that she had some sort of sexual relations with him on 3 different occasions. There's all sorts of other claims. There's real revolting stuff that we've heard before about when he first met Virginia. He asked how old she was. She said 17. This was in London, and he joked about, "Oh, you're not much older than my daughters." So it's really revolting stuff.
He guessed how old she was.
Yeah, he was asked to. He was asked to guess.
I guess you're 17.
And then Ghislaine Maxwell, who is of course serving a jail sentence for sexual trafficking at the moment, she joked about it and said, "Oh, soon we'll have to trade you in for someone younger." So it's sordid, it's revolting, and it's a disturbing read, actually, the book. It's not an easy read at all.
Indeed. Well, Robert, there have been suggestions that Charles acted not only because he felt it was the right thing to do, but also because he didn't want to kick this can down the road for William to have to deal with. Is that true?
I don't think there's any sense of we need to do this in this reign. I think it was just a feeling that we can't carry on like this. We just can't have this constant drip, 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 and it's a very heavy drip of accusations just distracting from the work of the monarchy. I mean, I don't think it would have been seen in a sort of a strategic way. It was very much the King's decision. Some people have said that this was Prince William driving it, but this sort of thing is very much what monarchs do. Anything to do with titles, and particularly as it's brother to brother. This was the King's decision. He will bear in mind that as you just heard the sort of the lurid details of the Giuffre book. I mean, it's harrowing stuff, but it has to be said that he says, this is nonsense. This didn't happen. What do you do when a loved one insists that they've been wronged? I mean, it's a he says, she says situation. So there has to be an element of innocent and proved guilty.
Yeah, but it's a he said, she said situation in which he paid.
I mean, there's so many of his sort of stories and alibis and whatever are falling apart. But I mean, as things stand, he still hasn't been formally accused of anything, or formally charged with anything, or formally convicted of anything. So that has a sort of bearing on what you can do. There has to be sort of basic processes to go through. But the King was quite adamant. He wants to put as much distance between the monarchy and Andrew as he can. And I think the feeling was that in doing this, I mean, Andrew doesn't receive any more money from the King. He doesn't. There's been talk this week, strip him of his taxpayers' funding. I mean, there isn't any. He is out on his own, and yet that's clearly not enough for the public and for many parliamentarians.
But I think yes, people are innocent until proved guilty. But the big change is we now know that Andrew is a liar.
Yeah.
He said something to the country which he knew at the time was not true, and the evidence has been published by the Mail on Sunday to prove that. So he may still say, "I had no sexual relations with her." I don't believe him. I believe her. I'm sorry.
It must be a relief for Prince William. Do you think he's had any influence in this move?
Well, Palace sources said at the time that the King had consulted members of his family, so not just William, but it would have been Anne and Edward as well, who he would have discussed this with before the statement was put out. To be honest, I mean, there's been a lot of speculation, people saying actually it's all Prince William, he's been driving it. From what I've heard, that's not the case, as Robert says. But I think he will be relieved, frankly, that it hasn't been he who's made the decision.
And he won't have to have any more awkward public face-offs at funerals and other such gatherings.
I mean, we'll see. I mean,
True.
No one has said that he can't turn up, so we'll see what happens in the future.
So, Richard Kay, you wrote a piece earlier this week where you said, many will wish Charles had acted sooner and that somehow fraternal affection clouded good royal sense. Do you think Charles just simply left it too late?
Well, I don't know if he's left it too late. He certainly left it late. And I think there is an element, quite understandably, that of course he is not just Andrew's brother, he's also the monarch. And it's clear to me, at least, that he was always hoping that somehow Andrew himself would do the right thing. But every opportunity that's presented itself, he's failed to do so. So he had, in the end, to act.
And you also wrote that the tragedy is that Andrew could have been a lifelong royal hero. We're looking at his past as a helicopter pilot during the Falklands War. So do you think there's a moment in which it all started to go wrong for Andrew?
For my money, the moment it all went wrong was when he decided he'd had enough of the Royal Navy and he wanted to do other things. And the decision in 2001 by the then Labour government to make him a roving ambassador on behalf of UK PLC, it was an unpaid job, but it opened all sorts of dodgy doors to him. And I think that was a catastrophic decision. We had a very good and very competent ambassador doing the job who didn't cause a headline. His name, the Duke of Kent, he's still with us. He had done that job magnificently for years and they took it away from him and gave it to Prince Andrew, and Andrew was not cut out and not equipped to do it.
But also Andrew, I presume for the longest time thought, he could act in exactly the way he wanted in that role. There was no consequences, there was no questions, there was no...
And as we know, he did. He acted exactly the way he wanted to, as an entitled prince who thought his opinions counted, and he carried on with his own personal agenda alongside
there was a long
the
list
official
of
role.
diplomats in the Foreign Office with tales to tell of sort of just toe-curling trade missions where he would just sort of blunder in and say the first thing that came into his head. At one point there was a trade mission trying to sell British helicopters to the Gulf, and the Duke goes, well, actually, these American ones are much better, and his ambassadors are sort of going,
And the same, I think on another trip in that same part of the world, he famously said... It doesn't
sound believable, does it?
We were trying to sell a fleet of planes, I think, training planes, and Andrew said, well, why don't you just rent them? And we wanted to sail, and so...
Wow, okay. Now, I do sympathise, Robert, with some public confusion about how Andrew has given up his titles but is still being referred to as Prince on the royal family's website. We had a comment from a lady, the name is Clarenlight, who wrote to us and asked, I don't understand why a monarch who bestows titles is unable to remove them. It's a fair comment, isn't it?
These things are always rather more complicated than than some people say. They're going to strip him of everything. There are three component parts. There's his dukedom, Duke of York. He got that when he got married. To take that away from him, that requires parliamentary legislation. So the king didn't want to start wasting Parliament's time doing that, which is why he asked him to not use it. That's why he's agreed not to. The prince bit, that is what he was born with. That's laid down in what are called letters patent. The rules on who gets to be prince were drawn up in 1917 by George V. That's what you get if you're the son of the monarch. To take that away from him would be an incredibly extreme step. The last time anyone was
de-prince... Is there a
de-princed...
process?
Yeah, well, the last time it happened was under something called the Titles Deprivation Bill of 1917. And that was the Duke of Cumberland, who, and there were three other royal HRHs. They all lost, and in his case, he was de-princed. He was no longer prince. It was made quite clear, because he was fighting for the Germans in the First World War. So generally, the threshold for losing your princeship, and the same goes with the honours, by the way. So the third component is the honours. He's a Knight of the Garter. He's a Knight Grand Cross of the Royal Victorian Order. Those have gone as well, or rather he's agreed not to use those. The last time anyone was stripped of the knighthood of the Garter, that was Emperor Hirohito in the Second World War. So the precedent is there. Yeah, you can take these things away, but the only people who've had them taken away up until now are traitors fighting this country. Now, you have to, whatever you think of Prince Andrew, you might absolutely loathe the guy, and he's shown all sorts, he's the most deplorable lack of judgment. He's, whatever you want to say about him. He hasn't betrayed his country. He hasn't fought against his country. Rather, he's fought in combat for this country. And I think the King's view would be that, well, that counts for something. You can't put him in the same box as royal relatives who were fighting for the Kaiser or the Emperor of Japan at the height of the Second World War.
Okay, well, as Robert said, Richard Kay, the royal family doesn't want to get into wasting Parliament's time on the process of removing titles, but it does also risk it just becoming even more embarrassing for the royal family, this prince.
Well, potentially.
title,
I mean, because quite clearly the actions that Andrew announced through Buckingham Palace last week have not been sufficient to end the clamour for more. I think when we hear terms like the royal family don't want parliamentarians wasting time, they don't actually want parliamentarians spending any time on the royal family, because they start digging, you never know what they're going to turn up. So I think that's a crucial part of it. But yes, I agree really with what Richard was saying earlier, that it doesn't now look sufficient what has happened. We're gonna want more.
Yeah, well, the King's saying he doesn't want Parliament wasting parliamentary time. There are MPs queuing up to waste parliamentary time. Saying, no, don't worry, no, we're very happy. We're quite happy to devote as much time as it needs, and that is a change of tack.
To be fair, it doesn't involve much parliamentary time. To give you one example, the King extended the numbers of those who could be councillors of state to include Princess Anne, Prince Edward. Put it through Parliament, went through very quickly. It doesn't need some sort of day-long debate or something.
Yeah, but it's still parliamentary time. I mean, in that one, Angela Rayner had to get involved. There were sort of documents that would chat. I mean, of course, it doesn't take that long, but it's still Parliament diverting from running the country to sort out the title of one guy.
Peering down that hole.
Yeah. No.
Here's another interesting comment that was raised. Patricia Taggart talking about another theory as to why the King may not have wanted to go to Parliament to remove Andrew's titles. She said, I believe what could be making King Charles hesitant to request Parliament to strip Andrew of all titles, including Prince, is that this act will also strip Andrew of diplomatic protection and therefore allow criminal procedures worldwide. Am I correct? Is she correct, Robert?
No, I mean, having a title doesn't really have anything to do with your diplomatic status. I mean, it's a moot point what sort of protections he would have anyway. I mean, the monarch as the fountain of justice is in a sort of special category, but other members of the royal family, when they commit crimes or they're charged with things, they're like the rest of us, so it wouldn't make any difference whether he's Duke, Prince or Mr.
Okay, there you go, there's your answer, Patricia. Now, our Rebecca English was on the front page of the Daily Mail on Tuesday with the story that Andrew has not paid rent on Royal Lodge, the big white elephant Royal Lodge, for 22 years. Now, Richard Eden, this will come as a big shock to people, don't you think? And will this be the next thing to go, finally?
I mean, I don't think it should come as a shock because it was known already. It was the way it worked was Prince Andrew bought the lease. It was for £1 million, and then he agreed to spend a lot of money. It was most of the money he had from the sale of his house that was given to him by the Queen on his wedding. Spent all the money on renovations, and that was kind of in lieu of rent in the future. That was known about. The big difference was he was an active working member of the royal family at that time.
Yeah.
The thing is, now he's not, so it doesn't look great. So yes, he's not paying rent, and obviously people are thinking, why is he in this huge, what amounts to a palace, 30-room Royal Lodge? And it is a real problem. The King has tried to get him out already. He cut off money to him. He suggested he move into Harry and Meghan's old home, Frogmore Cottage. Andrew fought back against that.
Everyone's really down on Frogmore, aren't they?
And now he's trying again. So it'd be very interesting to see if the King has more success this time.
Well, the Mail also exclusively revealed that Andrew is not believed to have received significant inheritance from either the Queen or the Queen Mother. So, Robert, how does he afford the upkeep of Royal Lodge and all his other royal perks?
He did. I understand that he did receive money from both the Queen Mother and the Queen, but it wasn't an inheritance in the sense that these were 7-year rule. This way you can transfer assets as long as you live for another 7 years. So he did receive money. He just didn't get it in a will. But the problem he has is that because he has forfeited his allowance, he was getting an allowance from the King, who said, well, if you move out of Royal Lodge, you can carry on with the allowance. He said, no, I'm going to stay at Royal Lodge. the king said, right, well, all the bills are yours. And it's incredibly expensive to maintain, not just to maintain it, but to protect. It has to have its own security cordon. I mean, it costs millions a year to run that place. And I think he was banking on the fact that there were still going to be business deals. There was still going to be some sort of income streams that were going to cover those costs. So he called the king's bluff and said, I'm going to stay there. Now, what we hear is that whatever residual deals he was looking forward to, they've fallen apart. So how he's going to carry on running it, I don't know. I suspect that actually the time is going to come quite soon when he does decide to move out. Then there's the question of where and who pays for that. That's a separate issue.
Well, indeed, Richard Eden, this whole episode raises the question, will there be more scrutiny of Andrew's finances now?
I think there certainly will, because the politicians have very much got involved. They clearly can sort of scent blood. They know it's popular to be bashing Andrew. We've seen the very ambitious senior Tory Robert Jenrick really laying into Prince Andrew. We've now had the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, saying that he backs an investigation into the terms of the lease that Andrew was given in Royal Lodge. And all this sort of political pressure, the king will absolutely hate, because the convention really in Parliament is they don't discuss the royal family. So it's very awkward, and I'm sure that they'll want it to end as soon as possible.
And what do you think might be the role of other members of the royal family, Richard Kay? Could there be a scenario where Anne and Edward play mediator roles, for instance?
I think Anne and Edward have played a role, and I think, if anything, I think they've been concerned about their brother's well-being, how he's handling this intense pressure, because take it up. You can't forget that there's a human being at the centre of all this. He's being accused of all sorts of dastardly deeds, which, as we've heard, he has always denied. His reputation is in the gutter. And I think both Anne and particularly Edward, who's closer to him, have been very concerned about how the king handles the whole situation and story. And I think they feel there's a duty of care towards Prince Andrew.
Well, it only gets worse, because just when you thought you'd heard everything on this story, the Mail on Sunday revealed two more royal bombshells. One, that Epstein set Andrew up with a second sex abuse victim, and two, that Andrew told the Met Police to dig up dirt on Virginia Guiffre. Now, Richard Eden, give us a quick summary of those allegations.
Yeah, in the case of the first one, it was Epstein saying, would you like to meet my friend for dinner? And the friend was clearly a glamorous young woman, and Andrew said, yes, great. It was a very odd exchange, and he was saying, but will she have a message from you? And you think, oh, what is this? Oh. So there was that, and it just added to the general sort of seedy tone of their exchanges. And then the other one is very serious. It was Andrew asking for help from his Royal Protection Officer, who we pay as taxpayers, to discredit Virginia. He knew what her social security number was in America, so he already had these details, and he was asking the protection officer to find out, does she have a criminal record? So, it's this real appalling sort of attempts to discredit this woman from the start, far from any contrition or anything like that, but trying to discredit her, which, is really awful to hear about, but also involving the police in this way. It's wrong.
Well, we have spoken to Di Davies, who is the Metropolitan Police's former head of royalty protection officer, who has given his thoughts on this story, and here's what he had to say.
Was I surprised that the allegation is that Prince Andrew had asked one of his PPOs, a duty PPO, whoever that was, he or she? Yes, I would be surprised at the audacity of a senior member of the royal family to ask for a police officer to actually go into anyone's details unless it's there for their protection, security, and even then you'd have to consider what lawful means you should use in order to actually activate such an inquiry. I cannot see in this case there would be any reasonable cause for him to ask potentially a senior police officer, because they're normally a sergeant, inspector, up to chief inspector in these teams, whoever he or she was, if indeed it's true. But the evidence, certainly from my perspective, looks as if it is true. So there are questions to be asked. Well, one of the key features of such a deployment is diplomacy. And I would hope they would diplomatically say, sir, or whatever other reference they have to him, that they would say, sir, this is not within the bounds of possibility, the realms of possibility, sorry, and I simply can't do it. Now, whether they would have the moral compass and savvy to actually, or dare to do that, remains to be seen. What kind of relationship they had, what type of experience they had, and were they a full-time PPO or somebody standing in who might, and I say might because these are all allegations, who might succumb to pressure, because I know he could be fairly forthright in his demands of his officers. On 3 times, the Met have actually looked at the allegations she made, and in their wisdom, they decided on 3 separate occasions they did not think there was sufficient evidence, or it would appear, it's now been told, they had jurisdiction in which to actually investigate it. I disagreed back in 2019. I vehemently said this is wrong. They should have investigated. And I always say, if you don't question anyone concerned with it, how on earth will you find evidence? So now they're faced with the embarrassing situation. More and more evidence has come out as to the alleged character of Andrew and those actually near or with him in terms of press officers. So the question now has to be, why has this been kept under the radar for so long? Somebody in the palace, in my very humble view, must have known more. Evidence must have come from whatever quarter, be it the FBI, the Home Office, or anywhere else, which revealed the depth of this issue. And I think they failed to grasp the significance of the whole situation, as Norman Baker eloquently put in the Daily Mail yesterday. If you look at the track record of the Met investigating anything to do with the royals, it fails, and questions succinctly are brushed aside, and we can't answer it on the grounds of security. Well, again, Andrew Lowney has very eloquently in his book and answered the questions, and I share his concern and the fact that whenever you ask for information, as he has on numerous occasions, it is blocked. It is blocked in terms of who went with him traveling the world, where he was associating with criminals, when he was associating with dictators. And yet somehow we've all brushed this aside and said, well, he denies everything. Well, he would, wouldn't he? You know, let's get real. Will somebody at long last ask some real questions of those involved, including Andrew himself?
Well, since Scotland Yard has admitted an internal probe into allegations that Andrew obtained Giuffre's confidential social security number. Now, Richard Kay, what would be the legal proceedings here on the back of this? Could Andrew go to jail?
Potentially, of course, but I think it's highly unlikely. I don't see what charges could be laid against him. They'll look into it. We don't know what the police officer who was asked by Andrew did. Did he just do as a competent senior officer would have done, which say something like, I don't think you should have told me to do that, sir. And it could have got brushed under the carpet. Otherwise, they will have to look into it. They said they will, but I suspect it'll quietly disappear in much the same way as when those allegations were raised about fundraising around the king and the question of whether honours were being dished out to people who had given him cash for his projects. That too did not lead to any kind of criminal action, although there was a police investigation.
How depressing. Robert, we've also heard that Andrew will be called to give evidence about his links to Epstein in front of a US committee. What's that about?
Well, he's been invited to before various civil courts, and I mean, it wouldn't be the first time that he's been asked. He'll take legal advice. I imagine the last thing he wants to do is go over to America. So unless there's some sort of extreme sort of form of deportation. And I rather like Richard, I just think that if we take all these things to the nth degree, anything's possible. But I think practically, no, he's not going to end up appearing before a hearing in New York or anywhere else in America. MPs here are saying they want to summon him before Parliament.
Well, yes, I was going to say, it's like, closer to home.
Yeah. Again, it's, they're not a court of law. I mean, he will take the legal advice and I'm imagining do all that he can to not appear. I mean, the last thing I think the monarchy want is Prince Andrew giving any more interviews to anyone ever.
I don't know. Can you imagine? It'd be quite a spectacle, wouldn't it? Okay, let's give our panellists a bit of a breather now and go to some comments from you. Now, Rebecca English received this email from longtime viewer Olivia Della Valliere. Hello, Rebecca. I'm a big fan of Palace Confidential. I think you and Richard are thoroughly good reporters, fair and just. And that leads me to comment on recent affairs involving Prince Andrew. I have never been a big fan of his, but as a lawyer and a person who respects honest, fair news and commentary, I feel it beholden upon me to note that this new book from Andrew's accuser is a completely unchecked, one-sided conviction which has never been put before a proper judge of its veracity. The problem with memoirs is that they are by definition based on someone's memories and guided, as we saw with Spare, by the author's spite, jealousy, anger or love. This new book is a thoroughly unfair exercise in character assassination. To make it all worse, the author isn't here anymore to be put to a fact check as Harry was and failed to pass for his book Spare. Someone with a platform needs to say this, and I'm hoping to find in you that platform, if of course you agree. With my best, Olivia. Now, thank you for your email, Olivia. We always try to present a fair and accurate view. So we do point out that Virginia is no longer here to clarify the claims she put forward in her book and that Prince Andrew strenuously denies the allegations made against him. Richard Eden sat down earlier this week to explain the Prince Andrew saga in detail, and that is definitely worth a watch, and you can click here for that. Now, after watching Richard Eden's video, V. Lind wrote to us and said, where was Prince Andrew's security during all this Giuffre mess? Surely they have records as to whether he was actually in Tramp nightclub on the evening she alleges. Surely they know if he drove his daughter to Pizza Express in Woking. They also travelled abroad with him. They could account for the number of visits he made to Epstein's homes and the island. Any thoughts on this, Richard Eden?
Well, yes, it is murky because, it's been looked into before. You would expect the police would have records of exactly where they were and what happened. But it seems that it wasn't very well recorded. I think there's been trouble locating things or coming down one side or the other. But I think also it's just very awkward for the police. Because they're getting drawn into it. It's the last thing they want. Their job is to protect these people. That's what we as taxpayers are paying them for. And they don't want to start getting into various allegations. So it's a sensitive, deep subject.
And a good question. Well, just in time for Halloween, Rebecca and I went on a ghostly tour of the Tower of London. If you can watch to the end of that video without jumping out of your skin, you are a little bit braver than me. Clearly not spooked though, Cheryl McBride commented, question, would Harry and or Andrew have been sent to the Tower of London? Loved this episode, never miss Palace Confidential watching from South Africa. Well, thank you very much for that. But obviously we couldn't possibly comment, although it used to be a fate for bad behaving
I would say
relatives
so.
of monarchies.
400 or 500 years ago,
Yeah.
they wouldn't just have been sent to the Tower of London, they'd have lost their heads.
Indeed. So there you go. So luckily we're in more enlightened times, just about. So, but thank you for all the love for our Royal Walks series. If you haven't seen it yet, our Tower of London episode will play after this. And finally, last week's Palace Confidential montage was dedicated to the royals and their horses. Anna had this to say, love your montage this week. Just noticed that the Princess of Wales doesn't have any photos with horses. Does that mean she doesn't ride one? Hope you could answer this. That's an interesting spot, Richard Kay. Do you have any intel?
Well, it was reported some years ago that the reason we never saw Kate on horseback was because she had some kind of allergy to horses. Maybe she needed antihistamines or something like that. But anyway, nevertheless, I understand that Catherine does ride, but not in public, very much like a previous Princess of Wales. We hardly ever saw Diana on horseback, but she could ride. But of course, both of her elder children, Catherine and George, are expert young riders already, and they're sort of following in the royal tradition. So it wouldn't be at all surprise me if that's from time to time, mother does hack out with her children.
But is it true that there really are no pictures for public consumption of Catherine on the horse?
I think that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are plenty of pictures of Catherine at the polo.
Or at the races,
watching,
watching Cheltenham. But I've never seen her, actually, a picture of her on a horseback. No.
Interesting. Okay, let's get back to it, shall we? All of this Andrew news has obviously impacted his ex-wife, Sarah Ferguson, as well, who's given up her title as the Duchess of York. She was even forced to change her social media profiles from Sarah the Duchess to Sarah M. Fergie 15, if you want to go and hit her follow button for her. It has been reported that Beatrice and Eugenie have pulled out of a charity event this weekend amid the turmoil that their parents are caught in the middle of. Richard Eden, I know you've always been a big supporter for the integration of the princesses into working royal life. Do you still stand by it?
I mean, poor women. Can you imagine just going through this with your dad being subjected? I mean, Eugenie actually set up a charity for anti-slavery network for women that had been trafficked, So it's obviously something she feels strongly about. So goodness knows what they were told by their father, and I'm sure this has all been horrific. But no, I mean, none of this should be held, none of what the parents have done should be held against them, I would say. They've never put a foot wrong, they've always tried to do the right thing, and any time they've been asked to carry out any duties, they've done it admirably. So personally, I still hope that there is a role for them in the future, and it's been made clear as well that they're not losing their princess titles.
Well, they're not at the moment. That's one of the reasons I think the king was much preferred the idea of Andrew stepping back from his dukedom rather than taking it away. Because if you actually if you abolish the House of York, there are implications for their titles. How can you be a princess of York if there's no House of York?
Yeah, so hopefully, they will get through this and perhaps have a role in the future.
Well, on that note, we've received this question from City Mummy in the comments from America. Can you please explain the Councillor of State role and duties? Has or will Princess Beatrice replace Andrew as Councillor of State? You would all know more than me, but does it seem kind of a bit here and a bit there when it comes to removing Andrew's titles and privileges? It might be dragging out the inevitable at this point, as sadly more information comes to light, and it sure seems to be overshadowing the wonderful work the royal family does. I think this one's for you, Robert. Councillor of State, quickly explain.
Councillor of State is somebody who is entitled to stand in for the monarch if the monarch is abroad or unwell and there's some urgent piece of national business needs to be done, and you need two of them to stand in for the monarch, and it's done according to your position in the order of precedent, order of succession to the throne, and as such, it also includes the consort, so Queen Camilla. And at the moment, it also includes Prince Andrew and Princess Beatrice, because she's his heir. Also, Prince Harry is in there. You've got to be over 21. I mean, in due course, George, Charlotte and Louis will take on that role. But for now, there was a problem. What would happen if the king was overseas? Could it be that you'd actually need Andrew signing some sort of piece of legislation? So to get round that, rather than tearing up this sort of ancient letters patent and all the rules around it, what the king did with the government say-so, and involved the government, was just to extend the number from 4, add on another 2. So they added on Anne and Edward, who no one would have any problem with. So in theory, Andrew can remain a Councillor of State. Would he ever be called upon? I mean, it would need an epic, terrible national disaster before that.
And what about Beatrice? Could she have that role?
She could have that role. Again, I think the solution would be at any time, look, if Andrew and Edward are around, that's fine. But for now, Beatrice is there. I mean, over the years, people like Princess Margaret were on the list. It all depended on who was over 21 and in the top 4 in line of succession to the throne.
Richard Kay, what the actual hell is going to happen with Andrew now? Do you have any advice?
Advice? Yeah. Well, if I was asked for my advice, I say pack your bags, get out of Royal Lodge for starters. That house, as Richard Eden said, symbolises everything that is wrong about Andrew, his excesses, his extravagance, his entitlement, and the public resent it. And he really has got to read the room here, which he has signally failed to do for so many years. But I think if he could move out of Royal Lodge, The question then, of course, is where does he move to? But I think getting that first step would be a step on a road to some kind of future for him. I mean, he's only 65. His father lived to nearly 100. There's every chance he's got another 20 years of life ahead of him. What's he going to do with himself?
And we have a very good precedent for this. King Juan Carlos of Spain, who, he essentially stood down and moved to the Middle East to let his son take over. So Andrew could do the same.
It was interesting this week, actually, the first time on the airwaves, I heard a former government minister suggesting that he go and live abroad. And I mean, the idea of exile, up until now, no one's talked about that. It's been Royal Lodge, but obviously the precedent is there with one thinks back to another discredited Duke of Windsor in the Second World War, packed off to the Bahamas.
Yeah, so Richard Eden, it does seem clear that just not asking Andrew to use a title and hoping things die down is not really going to be the answer, is it?
No, it doesn't seem to be. It's not acceptable, I don't think, to the British people. It hasn't cleared matters up. It's really just set hairs running with politics. They need to go much further, I would say, now.
Right, well, in his statement, Andrew himself said his personal issues have become an unwelcome distraction from the goings-on of the wider royal family. So it might be time to shine a bit of light on some of those. Well, this week, King Charles visited the Heaton Park Hebrew Congregation Synagogue in Manchester. Now, for our international viewers, Richard Eden, explain the context of the visit.
Well, it was a terrible attack that happened on Yom Kippur, the holiest of days for Jews, and 2 people were killed in this attack and others were seriously injured. And so the King has been there to visit everyone. It seems to be an extremely welcome visit from people there as a sign of solidarity and how much he feels on the side of the people.
Yeah, it was a reasonably political visit, wasn't it, Robert, where the King spoke of the need to de-radicalise people from the ghastliness of social media. Do you think this is something that Queen Elizabeth would have said, or is this a sign of the King being a more modern monarch?
Yeah, I don't think she would have used those words, but I mean, it is a reminder of that healing power of monarchy. I mean, it was very, very powerful, those scenes. They were so pleased. Yeah. They felt so vulnerable and so under attack. And for him to turn up, I think we can't overstate the importance of monarchy in those situations. I so well remember just after the terrible Grenfell fire disaster in 2017, and there was terrible atmosphere all around North London where there's this block of flats had gone up in smoke, killing dozens of people, and it was a horrible atmosphere. And suddenly the Queen arrived with Prince William, and it completely changed everything. People felt, here is the nation represented by this person. It's a big deal. So I think that was a very important reminder that, in the midst of all this, we've got this ludicrous sideshow of Prince Andrew, but what the monarchy goes on. And we've seen it again there. It's the Supreme Governor of the Church of England with the Pope for the first time since the days of Henry VIII.
Indeed, as we are recording, the King is praying with the Pope in the Vatican. It's a busy week as he and the Queen are in Rome, and we're hoping that Rebecca English will be back next week to tell us all about it. She's right there alongside them, as one would expect. Now, he has made history during the state visit, hasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he's taken on a new title. He and the Pope have exchanged titles. He's now called something called Confrater, which is, I mean, doesn't change anything to do with his position in the Church of England, but it's unquestionably a sign of a sort of thawing of relations between the two churches. And of course the Church of England famously started because Henry VIII wanted to get divorced way back in the 16th century, and this is a real landmark moment, which of course stands to be eclipsed by domestic matters involving his younger brother. But we should not let that get in the way of the fact this is a really big step in sort of multi-faith ecumenical history of the monarchy and the Church of England.
It's fascinating. Now, Richard Kay, obviously there was a state visit to Italy, I think some 40 years ago, where there were similar plans. What can you remember?
It wasn't a state visit. It was Charles, then the Prince of Wales, and the Princess of Wales, Princess Diana. They were guests of Pope John Paul II at the Vatican, and there was huge controversy about this visit because from the get-go, the king, the Prince of Wales, as he then was, wanted to take part in a public mass with the Pope. And the Pope himself, or the Vatican, decided that would not be appropriate. But what he did do was invite the Prince and Princess to pray privately with him at the Holy See. And there was pushback on that, and in the end, it was sort of a typical palace fudge. It was announced that the king had decided, on reflection, that probably he wouldn't pray with the Pope, but he would go and see him. So he and Diana went to see the Pope, but there was no element of prayer. In fact, there was uproar over here at the time. People like the Protestant firebrand from Northern Ireland, the Reverend Ian Paisley, and others on the extreme fringes of the Protestant faith took grave exception to the idea of a future governor of the Church of England getting down on his knees with the head of the Catholic Church.
Wow. Well, speaking of La Dolce Vita, we have compiled a montage of the royal family visiting Italy and the Vatican over the years, so do stay tuned for that. But for now, hear that. It is time for the Unsung Royal Hero of the Week. And Richard Eden, you have nominated the Duchess of Gloucester.
Yes, I mean, with all this going on, we talk about Andrew's dominating the headlines, or indeed the King at the Vatican. But other members of the royal family carry on quietly doing their work, which doesn't get reported.
Yeah.
This week, the Duchess of Gloucester, Birgit, was in Bermuda representing the King. It's a British overseas territory, the second biggest, I think. And she was just carrying out duties there, but very quietly, but it means a lot to the people of Bermuda.
Is anybody else I used to be so scared of the Bermuda Triangle when I was a kid. I was deeply worried about that. But Robert, we do hear a lot, don't we, about a certain American-born woman who married into the royal family. But the Duchess of Gloucester, she wasn't born in the UK either, was she?
She was born in Denmark, married Richard Gloucester, who was never supposed to be Duke of Gloucester. He was the younger brother. His elder brother was killed in a plane crash in the early 70s. And she's been a real asset. She's very popular in the royal family, particularly actually when last year when the King was ill and the Princess of Wales was obviously also having treatment, and during that period she was a real trooper, and she's actually one of the only non-royal women to be a member of the Order of the Garter, which is it's not widely known, but it's a real mark of respect. The royal family are very grateful to have her.
Well, we're very happy to shine a light on them here at Palace Confidential, aren't we? Richard Kay, we've talked about the slimming down of the monarchy many times, but surely we'll miss the likes of the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester when they can't make these trips.
Well, we will, and they're ageing like all of us, and they won't be able to go on forever. They do, as Robert says, a lot of the heavy lifting for the King, but increasingly they'll have to do less, and they will fade from the scene. I have to say, they're not the most recognisable members of the royal family. I think a lot of our viewers would be hard-pressed to spot them in a police lineup, if there were such a thing.
I think you might get challenged on that, but we'll see. Yeah.
But yeah, they do a lot of the unsung work, as Robert says, and I think the King's been very grateful for what they do.
Good shout, Richard Eden. Good shout. Well, as promised, here is one of our world-famous montages, featuring the royal family in Italy and the Vatican. simmer? Well, up next, Rebecca English and I get a right royal fright as we visit the Tower of London after dark for a new episode of Royal Walks. Click here for that. Huge thanks to my panellists today, Richard Kay, Robert Hardman and Richard Eden, for all their insights, and of course to you for watching. A reminder to sign up to the Palace Confidential newsletter by scanning the QR on screen now or following the link in the description below, and we will see you next week. Bye for now.